Why does God give to us so that we ultimately give back to him? What is the point? To show you what I mean, to show you what I am talking about, let's take a look at what King David says in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 12. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. And then in verse 14, look what else he says. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. Now, I think one of the main things that can be derived from these verses is that, for one thing, you can't outgive God, because ultimately everything you give him, he has already given you. So why then, if this is the case, does God give to us if he already possesses the very things he gives out in the first place? How does that make sense? In this video, I'll be explaining the answers to that. Now, there are three main reasons God gives to us, which are 1, survival, 2, joy, and then 3, purpose. And I'll be explaining the reasons for all three. Now, for the first one, which is survival, this one's pretty simple and self-explanatory. God obviously, gives to us so we can survive, because survival is what keeps us alive after all. And so God gives to us according to our needs, like food and water and all that. And he provides all that for us so we can stay alive. And the second one is joy. And the Lord gives us joy so that we can enjoy life and be content, as it would say in verses like Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 7. For joy is what sustains us and gives us rest, and ultimately it all points back to God, because God is the one who's providing it in the first place. And then God can provide you with joy, whether it be physical or spiritual. I mean, joy can be found in a fun pastime, like a sport, board game, playing an instrument, stuff like that. Or also just eating and drinking, as the book of Ecclesiastes would say. And joy can also be found in wine specifically. And the Bible even says God created wine for humans. And this comes from Psalm chapter 104, verses 14 through 15, which says, He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for man to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth, wine that gladdens the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread that sustains his heart. And then besides that, joy can also be found by simply appreciating the little things in life, as people say, like enjoying good weather. Or joy can also simply be found in spiritually delighting yourself in God, which, by the way, is the ultimate and most important form of joy. And when you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart, as it says in Psalm chapter 37, verse 4. But the point is that joy, regardless of where it comes from, gives us strength and can even make the work that we do in life easier and perhaps even more meaningful, because our joy makes us content. However, I will say that if one is not careful, joy that specifically can come from physical things can also easily morph into becoming an addiction. For example, if you eat too much food, or you're addicted to food, if that's an accurate way to put it, you can become fat and unhealthy. If you drink too much, you'll become drunk. Or look at what it says here in Proverbs 25, verse 16. Do you like honey? Don't eat too much, or it will make you sick. Now, the point of this verse specifically the point it's trying to make is that when it comes to joy, with the exception, of course, of delighting yourself in God, we basically ought to exercise moderation. Besides just food and beverages, you can also get sick from playing too many video games, for example. Video games can have the potential for harm if you develop an addiction and you're sitting down for hours on end, which isn't good for your body. Or if you spend too much time on it and you neglect other important things in your life, like your family or something. I think you get the point. And there will also always be times in everyone's life where physical joy, at least, will be lacking or absent. And the work we do might become harder, more difficult as a result. And this is where I say that, in moments like that, this is when we got to rely on God to sustain us and for us to continue pushing forward. Because we can't always rely on physical things like video games or wine or something similar to always be around to sustain us and give us rest. These things, are temporary, and they won't be around forever after all. And so relying on them without relying on God is basically a recipe for disaster or despair. And if and when these things fail us, and even when they don't fail us, God still must be our ultimate source of joy, fulfillment, and rest, regardless if we have something like wine or not. Take the apostles, such as the Apostle Paul, or just take the early church in general as examples. They certainly didn't have easy lives. They did not live in a comfy secure society like many of us do today. They were on a consistent basis, like persecuted, hated, poor, martyred, killed for their faith. And then using Paul as a more specific example, he too was consistently persecuted, imprisoned, flogged, constantly attacked by his own fellow Israelites and Jews. And in Acts 14 in particular, for example, he was stoned, but he survived. And then one more example comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 27, where Paul says, I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Just despite everything that Paul went through, he never lost his hope or his joy because he had his eyes set on the hope of Christ and heaven. And so that is what sustained him, which is why in Romans chapter 8, verse 18, he also says this, For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. And then elsewhere in Philippians chapter 4, verse 12, he says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And so therefore, bearing these examples in mind and knowing, some examples of, what Paul and the early church went through, they were not relying on things like wine or like physical delights to sustain them. They relied on God and found their joy in him first and foremost. God was their anchor. Now, if we have wine or if we have some other physical thing that brings us joy and rest, then don't feel ashamed of using or indulging it. This is what Ecclesiastes chapter 9, 7 through 8 says. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for it is now that God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white and always anoint your head with oil. Now, verse 7 in this verse is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically saying, go enjoy yourself. But in verse 8, when it says to always be clothed in white and anoint your head with oil, I think the overall meaning here is that while you enjoy life, also maintain your purity, because the color white is symbolic of purity. And this goes back to what I said earlier about, being moderate. And so with all that being said, this brings us to the third and most important reason God gives to us, which is purpose. Now, without purpose, the other two are basically meaningless or lose their significance. Therefore, the third reason God gives to us is so that we can also give to others and help others in general. He gives to us so that we can perform the works that he wishes us to do, because God has given each and every human being a purpose in life, whether it be small or great, in accordance with his will. It can be as small, for example, as like taking care of and providing for your family or your loved ones. Who can't or struggle to take care of themselves. It can be as small as simply praying for others. And if after speaking these words, if anyone wants to say that I'm preaching like a works-based faith, where we're basically saved by our works and not by our faith, then allow me to elaborate further. Let's start by looking at what it says in Luke chapter 12, verses 47 through 48. That servant who knows his master's will and does not get ready or does not do what his master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Now, what are these verses trying to say? It's basically saying that if you have the capability or the resources or, whatever else God has given you to do good, like in the general sense, then God expects you to make something of it. And he does not judge you based on, whether you succeed or fail, but he judges you based on if you actually tried. And notice how in the verses, the master didn't beat the servant simply for not trying. He beat him because the servant blatantly ignored or refused to do what they were supposed to do, that they knew they were supposed to do, and what they were entrusted with doing. And you can also think of it in this way. Like in our modern day society, we have like part-time workers, full-time workers. And part-time workers specifically, they're obviously given or paid less than full-time workers, but they also don't work as much because not as much is demanded of them. And then the full-time worker, on the other hand, is paid and given much more, but he is also entrusted with more responsibilities and more work to do and in general, and is therefore much more is asked and demanded of him. And so for both the part-time and the full-time worker, if they know what they are supposed to do or what they ought to do, and just, they just simply refuse to do it, then, well, they're either going to be reprimanded or fired on the spot. I mean, depending on the profession, many jobs will literally just fire you on the spot. However, for the part-time worker specifically, in the scenario that this part-time worker is like a brand new hire, and he's still like learning the ropes of the job, and is, he's prone to making more mistakes and messing up, obviously. Therefore, when this new worker messes up, he is shown more mercy and leniency because he has not yet he doesn't fully understand yet like what he needs to do or what's expected of him, or just what he's doing in general. And so this latter example in particular ties into the verse which says, "The one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows." However, all this also ties back into what I was explaining earlier, that when God gives you a lot, whether it be wealth, knowledge, or something else, he wants you to steward it and make good use of it. He wants you to help people with it. And even those who are given very little, they ought to do what they can with what little they have. And even if the little things that such a person as this can do might seem small or meaningless in the eyes of the world, it's definitely not small or meaningless in the eyes of God. So don't think that. And this fact is also proven by, the book of Mark, chapter 12, verse 41 through 43. And these verses, it talks about the people at the temple in Jerusalem. They were giving their offerings and tithes to the temple. Many of the rich put in lots of money, but there was this one poor old woman who was only able to put in like 2 small copper coins, which back then and even today was basically not enough to even buy like a loaf of bread. And then look what Jesus said in Mark chapter 12, verse 43 through 44, when he saw the old woman do this. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth. The poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." And so let me reiterate again that what this woman had to live on at that time could not even get her a loaf of bread at the time. Like, food was literally not an option for her to be sustained. But in faith, she believed that God would sustain her. And I mean, if Jesus himself said in his own words that this woman who only gave 2 small copper coins actually gave more than the rich, then understand that for those of you who like listening or watching or whatever, who have like little and yet use it and steward it to the best of your ability, this is great and significant in God's sight. And so with that being said, we should all also understand that God gives all human beings on earth gifts, talents, and strengths. And if you know how to use them for good, or rather, the good you ought to be doing with them, then that is exactly what you should be doing. Because look at what it says in James 4:17. "Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins." Now, on the flip side, if a person does not know the good that they can or should do, then God is not going to hold you. God's not going to hold that against you. And this ties into another point I want to make, which is that not everyone knows or understands the gifts or talents that they actually have. Like, sometimes it takes people a long time to figure that out. I mean, sometimes it takes years to know, like, what God has purposed for their life or what gifts God has otherwise given a person that they can do good with. I mean, I can say that for my own self, for example, I believe that at least one of the purposes God has given me is, to create videos on YouTube, which is what I'm doing right now. To encourage people, give them hope, and also to strengthen people's faith, among other things. However, I didn't start this channel up until about I think it was a little over a year ago as of making this video. And I was only about maybe 23 years old then. Now I am 24. It took me 23 years to understand how to use the gifts God has given me. And my gifts or talents are, I would say, as far as I can tell, are discernment and pattern recognition specifically. And without sounding, arrogant or like I know the Bible better than anyone else, but basically these gifts help me to easily discern and understand many of the deeper meanings of Scripture, and how they apply to real life or how this connects to that, etc. However, while I am very discerning, I am by no means a good speaker. I am what you would call like an introvert. Talking and conversational skills are not up my alley. They're not. And so because of this, for many years, while I was aware of the gifts that I had, I was mostly unsure how to apply them or use them in a way to help people. But then I consider the fact, God has given me this PC. And, it's actually kind of funny because when I first obtained this PC years ago, I actually didn't originally have any plans on using it for like a YouTube channel at first. In fact, this is like a gaming PC. I originally used it for gaming, which I don't really use it for anymore. But however, since I had a PC, I finally got the idea to start a YouTube channel. And so I got some of the necessary equipment for it, like mic, camera, and started downloading some of the necessary software and editors I need to use and all that. And now here we are. However, my point in all this is that I don't want anyone to be ashamed if they have not yet discovered their true talents or gifts or how to apply them and use them effectively. I mean, I've heard stories of people who didn't find that stuff out until like they were well into like their 50s, 60s, or like way older than that. I mean, you don't always find them out early on. But I will say, reflect and consider what your strengths are. And then reflect and consider what is within your capability to do good with whatever you got or are able to do in general. And then do your best with it. Because that's all God desires of us. Do your best with what you have. Whether you succeed or fail, that's not what matters. What matters is that you tried. And I can certainly say for myself that, my YouTube channel as of now obviously isn't what anyone would call big or successful. But, I mean, I'm giving it my all, and I'm trying to improve all the time. Because what I do on my channel is what I know how to do best. It's the best way I know how to apply and make use of the gifts and talents that God has given me. And that is why I do not give up, and that is why I keep going no matter what. So while I work on this channel, God gives me the necessities I need to survive, such as food, water, and a roof over my head, obviously. And I delight myself in Him, and He fills me with joy. And while I do not drink wine, I don't drink wine. He has given me things like, video games as a way to wind down and find rest in my toil. So video games are figuratively my wine, figuratively speaking. But at the same time, I am careful not to drink too much of it, figuratively speaking. Lest I derail myself and lose too much time or whatever other bad things will happen. So therefore, I know the purpose that God has for me. And it is my duty and is my pleasure to fulfill it. Now, I will admit that the work that I do on this channel is not always a joy. And has oftentimes, in fact, been, it's been a great burden or frustration to me on many occasions. Because, many of my videos talk about many sensitive topics and subjects, and as a result, I'm constantly micromanaging, basically every word I choose to speak or write. Because I'm always afraid that I might say something that's false, which, figuratively speaking, will be like a stumbling block for my audience. I don't want that to happen. Oftentimes, I also get really bad brain fog, and as I'm making these videos and creating the content, I'll lose my train of thought or spend, a lot of time in frustration because I just can't find the right words I want to write or say. And to give you one more example is that I am oftentimes a very big perfectionist. I always want to make my work as good as can possibly be. But being a perfectionist can waste a lot of time. Correcting minor mistakes that don't matter that much, and being a perfectionist can be draining in itself. Basically worrying about all the possible mistakes that could happen. And then lastly, being a perfectionist is also to an extent you could say is like a disguise for pride, because I begin relying more on myself than on God, and I'm placing this heavy yoke on myself and don't put on the light yoke of Christ. And I might not even realize that until later. But my point in all this is, it goes back to what I said earlier about joy. Sometimes it's absent, and the work that we do becomes harder and more frustrating to do. But that doesn't mean that we should give up, or we should continue pushing forward and rely on the Lord to sustain us and help us achieve our goal. Because this is what it says in Philippians 3:14. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. However, when we do have joy, in whatever form it comes in, then we should also follow the words of Ecclesiastes 8:15, which says, "So I commend the enjoyment of life, because nothing is better for a man under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of the life God has given him under the sun." Now you'll notice how in this verse it says that joy will accompany a person in their work, which backs up a lot about what I've been saying about the relationship between joy and purpose. But however, with all that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one.